The last coalition ship broke orbit at 3:47 hours, and Marin Akafer watched its drive signature bleed across the sky like a wound closing. Around her, the field hospital shook, not from bombardment, from the sonic backwash of a fleet running for its life, every engine at emergency thrust, the sound rolling across Sahel 4's surface like the voice of something large and indifferent telling her she was no longer worth the fuel. She stood in the doorway of Surgical Bay 3 with blood on her gloves and a Nari child's cardiac rhythm still beeping on the monitor behind her. The air tasted like ozone and burned soil. Across the valley, the Vreth Dominion's forward columns were already moving. She could see their crawler tanks throwing dust plumes against the horizon, slow and deliberate, an advancing wall of gray metal and alien certainty. Sigma 7, this is Fleet Actual. Admiral Sethran's voice came through the comm unit mounted on the wall, the translation matrix rendering his Athery speech patterns into flat, accentless English. Coalition withdrawal is complete. All ground elements are to consider extraction windows closed. Repeat, closed. Medical detachment Sigma 7, you are beyond retrieval threshold. We cannot delay departure. A pause. The kind of pause that is not a pause but a decision already made, dressed up as hesitation. You are already lost to us. The channel went dead. Corporal Tamaz Reyes was standing behind her. She could smell his terrible synthetic coffee. He kept a battered flask of it tucked into his vest like a talisman, and he drank it at moments that made no nutritional or tactical sense. This was one of those moments. He took a sip, grimaced, and said, "Well, that's honest at least." Marin pulled off her gloves. She looked at the valley, at the advancing Vreth columns, at the dust and the dying light. Then she looked back into the surgical bay, where Dr. Leon Pham was bent over a Nari woman whose left side had been opened by shrapnel, her four-fingered hands working with the quiet precision of someone who had decided long ago that the world's opinion of her circumstances was irrelevant to the task in front of her. "How many at Outpost Mercy?" Marin asked. Tamaz checked his datapad. Last contact was 6 hours ago. Sergeant Abiola reported 212 patients, 47 critical. They've got 3 medics and whatever supplies they had when the line collapsed. He looked up. That was before the orbital strikes. The orbital strikes. Their own fleet's parting gift. Coalition warships had laid down a sterilization corridor as they withdrew, burning a 60-kilometer strip of Sahel 4 surface to slag to slow the Vreth advance. Outpost Mercy was 19 kilometers beyond that strip, on the wrong side. Come. Dead, the strikes fried every relay between here and there. Marin looked at her team. There were 11 of them left in the forward station, 12, counting her. Medics. Surgeons, trauma specialists. Not a single weapon among them beyond a few utility blades and Deo Abiola's stubborn insistence that a bone saw counted as personal defense. They wore the white and blue field suits of compact medical corps, marked with the open-hand sigil that meant the same thing in 37 species visual languages. I am here to help. I am not armed. Do not shoot me. She knew what the sigil was worth against a Vreth crawler tank. She also knew what 212 patients with 3 medics looked like after 6 hours without resupply. "We're going forward," she said. Nobody argued. That was the thing about the humans on Sigma 7. They had all, at some point in the last 18 months of this war, made the private calculation that staying alive was not the same thing as staying useful, and they had each decided which one mattered more. It was not a decision they discussed. It lived in the way Tamaz packed his kit, in the way Leon closed her surgical case with both hands like she was closing a prayer book, in the way Deo checked his bone saw and grinned at no one. They moved out at 400, 12 humans walking east into the Crossfire. The landscape between the forward station and Outpost Mercy had been green 2 days ago. Sahel 4 was a temperate world, its valleys thick with a rust-colored ground cover the Nari called Sealith, a living carpet that smelled like wet copper and moved faintly in wind, each frond phototropic, tilting toward whatever light source was strongest. The coalition's orbital strikes had turned 7 kilometers of it to glass. They walked across the glass first. It crunched under their boots, a sound like walking on frozen lakes, the kind of sound that makes you conscious of your own weight, your own fragility, the thin membrane between standing and falling through. Beneath the fused surface, Marin could see the ghost shapes of coelith fronds, flash frozen in their last phototropic reach, all of them pointing upward toward the light that had killed them. "Our guys did this," said Private Yuki Tanaka. She was 22. She had joined the medical corps because her mother had been a nurse in Osaka and her grandmother before that, and she had the particular kind of quiet stubbornness that comes from women who have spent generations cleaning up after men with weapons. She said it without judgment, just observation. The glass crunched. "Yes," Marin said. "To slow them down." "Yes." "Did it work?" Marin looked east. Beyond the glass field, the ground was still burning in places, low, sullen fires that fed on the organic substrate of Sahel 4 topsoil, producing a greasy smoke that hugged the terrain. Through the smoke, the shapes of Vreth crawler tanks were visible, moving in their characteristic formation. A broad crescent, the horns curving forward, the center held back. Patient, methodical. The Vreth did not rush. They advanced the way a tide advances, not because it was in a hurry, but because it did not know how to stop. "No," Marin said, "not really." They cleared the glass field and entered the burn zone. Here the world was black and orange, charred coelith stubble, exposed rock glowing with residual heat, the air thick enough to taste. Marin pulled her rebreather up and heard the others do the same. The filters would hold for maybe 4 hours in this density. After that, they'd be breathing particulate. It was in the burn zone that they found the first refugees. A Nari family, or what was left of one. An adult and 2 children, huddled in the shell of what had been a ground transport vehicle. The adult was dead. Had been dead for hours, based on the coloration. Nari skin shifted from its living silver blue to a dull pewter when circulation stopped. The 2 children were alive. They were pressed against the dead adult's body. Their wide eyes, Nari eyes, were large, dark, almost entirely pupil, evolved for Sahel 4 long twilight seasons, tracking the humans' approach with the absolute stillness of creatures who had learned that movement attracted death. Marin crouched. She held up her hands, palms out, showing the open hand sigil on her gloves. She did not speak. Nari children in trauma responded better to gesture than to sound. Their auditory processing shut down under stress, a survival reflex from their evolutionary history as prey animals on a world with large sonic-hunting predators. The older child, maybe 8 in human-equivalent developmental years, reached out and touched Marin's glove. Its fingers were trembling. Then it made a sound, a low tonal hum that the translation matrix in Marin's earpiece rendered as, "The sky burned and Mother stopped." "I know," Marin said softly. "I know we're going to help you." She assigned Yuki and another medic, Private Chen, to stabilize the children and follow at their own pace. The rest pushed on. They found more as they went. Refugees, wounded, dead. The burn zone was a killing field that had not discriminated. Nari civilians, coalition soldiers who had been too slow or too wounded to make the extraction ships. Even a few Vreth scouts caught in the wrong place when their enemy's fleet decided to salt the earth behind them. Marin stopped at each one, checked vitals, made the call treatable, transportable, gone. She marked the treatable ones with a locator beacon from her kit and kept moving. At one point they found a coalition trooper, Athery, by the armor configuration, still alive under the shell of a collapsed transport. The soldier's lower body was pinned, and the chitinous plates of its thorax were cracked, leaking the pale blue ichor that served the Athery as blood. It saw the medical sigils and made a sound that the translation matrix rendered as laughter, though there was nothing funny in it. "They left me," it said. "My own unit. The extraction was, they said there was no time. They said I was already. I know what they said. Marin crouched beside it, checking the crush injuries. Not survivable, not out here, not with what they carried. She knew it. The Athery knew it. But she opened her kit anyway and administered a pain suppressant, watched the tension leave the soldier's posture as the drug took hold. You're the human medics, the Athery said. Its voice was softer now, drifting. The ones who stayed. That's us. Why? Marin didn't answer. She held the soldier's upper appendage, the one that wasn't pinned, and waited. It took about 4 minutes. The Athery's breathing slowed, stuttered, stopped. The pale blue ichor darkened to indigo. The compound eyes went flat. Marin closed her kit. She marked the body's coordinates so that someone, someday, could come back for it. Then she stood and kept walking. Private Adiz Nwasu, the youngest on the team at 20, a Lagos girl like Marin, with the same stubborn tilt to her jaw that Marin recognized because she saw it in her own mirror, fell into step beside her. Commander, how many more? I don't know. Do we stop for all of them? We stop for all of them. Adiz nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't ask the obvious follow-up, which was what happened when stopping for all of them meant arriving at Outpost Mercy too late. She simply adjusted her kit on her shoulder and matched Marin's pace, and there was something in the way she did it, the small, deliberate straightening of her spine, that reminded Marin so sharply of her own daughter that she had to look away. The photograph of her daughter was tucked inside her medkit, sealed in a waterproof sleeve. Amara, age 6, grinning at the camera with 2 missing front teeth and a hand-drawn card that said "Come home soon, Mama" in wobbly letters. Marin did not look at it. She didn't need to. She could feel its weight against her hip like a second heartbeat, a small rectangular certainty that there was a world beyond this one where children lost teeth instead of lives, and the worst thing that happened was a skinned knee. It was efficient. It was necessary. It was the kind of work that turns you into a machine if you let it, and Marin had learned years ago the trick of not letting it. You keep one small human thing alive in your chest while you work. A song, a memory, a name. Hers was a lullaby her grandmother had sung in Yoruba, a simple melody about a child and a river and the moon, and she hummed it now under her breath beneath her rebreather as she moved from body to body in the burning dark. Tamaz heard her. He always heard her. He fell into step beside her and unscrewed his flask. You know, he said, in a just universe this coffee would taste better during the apocalypse, like as compensation. In a just universe, we wouldn't need the compensation. Fair point. He drank, grimaced, offered her the flask. She took it. The coffee was exactly as terrible as advertised, thin, bitter, with a chemical aftertaste that suggested the synthetic beans had been grown in something that was technically a nutrient solution but spiritually a war crime. She drank it anyway. It was warm, and warmth was a human thing, and human things were what she was here for. They reached the edge of the burn zone at 5:30. Beyond it, Sahel 4 landscape reasserted itself, the rust-colored sealith, the low, rolling hills, the pale sky beginning to lighten toward what passed for dawn on this world. And there, on the crest of the nearest hill, the remains of Outpost Mercy. It had been hit. Not destroyed. The Coalition's modular medical shelters were built to survive a lot, and Outpost Mercy had been dug into the hillside, its main structure half underground. But the bombardment had collapsed the eastern wing, shattered the solar arrays, and torn open the supply depot. Smoke rose from 3 separate points. The open-hand sigil on the outer wall was scorched but still visible, one blackened palm reaching up through the damage like a hand raised from rubble. Marin stared at it for a long moment, then she started walking. Sergeant Deo Abiola met them at the entrance with blood on his shirt and a bone saw in his hand, and an expression that Marin had learned to read over 18 months of shared catastrophe. Relief so intense it manifested as annoyance. "Took you long enough," he said. "We had to walk through a glass desert. What's your excuse?" 219 patients, 7 dead since last contact, 31 critical, and my autoclave broke 4 hours ago, so I've been sterilizing instruments in a field kettle like it's the 19th century. He stepped aside to let them in. Also, the Vreth are about 3 hours out, maybe 4. They're not rushing. They never rush. No, they never do. Inside, Outpost Mercy was chaos organized by desperation. The main ward, a long, low-ceilinged space carved into the hillside, was packed. Nari civilians lay on every available surface, their silver-blue skin mottled with the dark blotches that indicated blast trauma, or, worse, the early signs of the Crimson Drift. The Drift was the Vreth's parting gift to every world they contested, a bioweapon engineered to target carbon-based respiratory systems, flooding the lungs with a fluid that hardened into crystalline structures over 72 hours, slowly suffocating the host. It was not contagious between individuals. It was delivered via atmospheric dispersal, and the Vreth had seeded Sahel 4 lower atmosphere with it 3 days ago. The Nari were dying, not quickly, not cleanly, with a slow, grinding drowning that left them conscious and aware through most of it, their dark eyes wide, their hands grasping at nothing. And mixed among them, this was what made Maren stop in the doorway, what made her breath catch behind her rebreather, were Vreth wounded. 3 of them. 2 soldiers and what appeared to be a technical specialist, based on the markings on its chitinous armor. They had been placed in the far corner of the ward, separated from the Nari patients by a curtain of medical sheeting, but they were there. Bandaged, treated, monitored. Maren looked at Deo. They came in during the bombardment, he said. His voice was careful, the way it got when he was ready to defend a decision. Caught in the same strike that hit us, crawled to the door. One of them was bleeding out. He paused. I'm a medic, Maren. I know what you are. Then you know I didn't have a choice. She looked at the Vreth wounded. One of them was conscious, its compound eyes tracking her with the fractured, multidirectional attention of its species. Vreth eyes didn't focus the way human eyes did. They saw everything at once, a panoramic field of overlapping images, and the effect was unsettling. You could never tell if a Vreth was looking at you or through you, or at something behind you that you couldn't see. You had a choice, Maren said. You made the right one. Deo exhaled. It was the kind of exhale that contains about 6 hours of held breath. Maren's team dispersed into the ward like water finding cracks in stone. Leon went straight to the Crimson Drift cases, pulling sample kits from her pack, her face already wearing the expression that meant she was 3 steps ahead of herself, and running calculations in her head that she would not share until they were finished. Tamaz set up a triage station near the entrance, his terrible coffee flask perched on the edge of a supply crate like a small, bitter sentinel. Yuki arrived 20 minutes later with the 2 Nari children and Private Chen, and the older child, the one who had touched Maren's glove, was immediately taken to a cot near the center of the ward. It was there, 40 minutes into the work, that Maren found Kale. She didn't know the child's name yet. She knew only that it was young enough that its cranial ridges hadn't fully calcified, giving its head a softer, rounder shape than the adults, and that it was dying. The Crimson Drift had advanced further in Kale than in any other patient she'd seen. Its breathing was a wet, crystalline rasp, each inhale producing a faint chiming sound as air moved through the lattice forming in its lungs. And from its eyes, those enormous dark Nari eyes, luminescent fluid was leaking. Not tears. Nari didn't cry the way humans did. This was the drift reaching the lacrimal system, the crystalline structures forming in the tear ducts, forcing out bioluminescent lymphatic fluid that glowed a faint, terrible gold. The child was weeping light. Maren sat beside it. She took its hand. The fingers were cool and fragile, 4 slender digits that curled around her own with surprising strength. "What's your name?" she asked. The translation matrix hummed. The child's voice was a whisper threaded with crystal. Kale. Kale, I'm Marin, I'm a doctor. I'm going to help you. Kale's glowing eyes fixed on her. The luminescent tears tracked down its face in slow, golden lines. The others said the fleet left. They said no one is coming. That's true, the fleet left. Then why are you here? Marin squeezed the small hand. Because the fleet doesn't get to decide who we help. Kale was quiet for a moment. Then, will you come back? If you leave, will you come back for me? Marin looked at this alien child on an alien world, dying of an alien weapon, in a hospital that had been abandoned by every authority with the power to save it. And she felt the specific, irreducible weight of a promise that she might not be able to keep. I will come back for you, she said. Kale's fingers tightened around hers. Then I will wait. Leon found her an hour later in the supply room that doubled as a command post. Marin was reviewing the inventory, or what was left of it. Medical supplies for maybe 48 hours if they rationed hard. No weapons. No communications beyond short range. No extraction. No cavalry. I need to show you something, Leon said. She led Marin to a makeshift lab she'd set up in a storage alcove. A portable analyzer, sample trays, a holographic display showing molecular structures that looked like frozen fireworks. Leon's hands moved through the display, rotating models, zooming in on crystalline lattices. The Crimson Drift, she said. I've been studying the progression in the Nari patients. It's elegant, brutally elegant. The crystalline matrix forms along the alveolar surfaces, follows the bronchial tree, eventually reaches the pleural space. 72 hours from exposure to complete respiratory failure. I know what it does, Leon. You know what it does to Nari. Leon pulled up a second model. This is what it does to human lung tissue. The model was different. The crystalline structures were there, but stunted, half-formed lattices that broke apart before they could establish the matrix. Our respiratory epithelium is too acidic. The drift can't get purchase. It starts to crystallize, but the pH differential dissolves the bonds before they set. We're immune. Not immune. Resistant. The drift affects us. You'll notice some of the team has been coughing. It's irritating our airways. But it can't kill us. The crystals can't form. Leon paused. She had the look she got when she was about to say something that mattered more than she wanted it to. Marin, I can use this. Our respiratory mucosa produces a specific enzyme, a carbonic anhydrase variant, that disrupts the drift's crystallization. If I can isolate it, synthesize it, deliver it as an aerosolized treatment. You can cure them. I can stop the progression, maybe reverse it in early-stage cases, like Kale. Leon's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. I need time. I need maybe 40 hours. And I need the Vreth to not kill us while I work. Marin looked at the molecular models spinning in the air between them. She thought about Kale's golden tears. She thought about the 48 hours of supplies. She thought about the Vreth crawler tanks, 3 hours out, patient and inevitable as a tide. Then we'd better make sure they don't, she said. The next 20 hours were the longest of Marin's life, and she had lived through some long ones. The siege of Calton Station, the evacuation of Marin's world, the colony they'd named after her by accident, because she'd been the first medic to arrive, and the refugees had assumed she was in charge. And by the time anyone corrected them, it had stuck. The 18-hour surgery on the Athery ambassador, whose biology turned out to be significantly more complicated than the textbooks suggested. But this was different. This was waiting. The Vreth advanced on Outpost Mercy with their characteristic patience. Marin watched them through the outpost's remaining sensor array, a single functioning camera mounted on the roof, its feed grainy and stuttering. The crawler tank stopped 2 kilometers out and deployed infantry. Vreth infantry moved in tight, overlapping formations, their chitinous armor blending with the terrain until they looked like pieces of the landscape that had decided to rearrange themselves. They established a perimeter. They set up field positions. They waited. They did not fire. This was, Marin knew, either very good or very bad. The Vreth were methodical. If they intended to destroy the outpost, they would have shelled it from 2 kilometers out and moved on. The fact that they were establishing a perimeter meant they intended to come in. Which meant they wanted something: intelligence, prisoners, or simply the satisfaction of looking their enemy in the eye before they finished the job. "They're scanning us," Tamaz reported from the sensor station. "Full-spectrum sweep. They can see everything: our heat signatures, our equipment, our supply levels." "Can they see the patients?" "If they're scanning thermal, they can see every body in this building. Nari, human, and their own wounded." Marin thought about that. She thought about the 3 Vreth soldiers in the corner of the ward, bandaged and monitored and alive, because Deo had decided that a medic was a medic regardless of whose uniform the patient was wearing. "Good," she said. "Let them look." The hours crawled. Marin's team worked. That was the thing. There was no dramatic standoff, no tense confrontation across battle lines. There was work. Leon hunched over her analyzer, isolating enzyme chains, running synthesis protocols on equipment that was never designed for this purpose, swearing quietly in Vietnamese when the results weren't clean enough. Deo performed 3 surgeries in the main ward, his bone saw earning its keep on a Nari patient whose shattered limb had developed secondary infection. Yuki changed dressings, checked vitals, held hands. Chen ran the supply inventory with the grim efficiency of someone who knows that every bandage is a small death postponed. Adiz worked the triage station with a precision that belied her age. She had a gift for reading Nari vital signs, something about the rhythm of their secondary pulse, a faint electromagnetic flutter beneath the primary heartbeat that most human medics missed, but that Adiz could detect with her fingertips. She moved from patient to patient with her hands held just above the skin, reading the invisible current, and when she found one faltering, she would call it out, calm, clear, already reaching for the right instrument before anyone else had registered the change. At hour 18, the outpost's last power coupling failed, plunging the ward into darkness. For a long, bad moment, the only light came from the luminescent tears of the drift patients, dozens of pairs of eyes weeping gold in the blackness, a constellation of slow suffocation. Then Tamaz pulled a crate of emergency chemical lights from the ruined supply depot, and the team cracked them and hung them from every available surface, filling the space with a pale green glow that turned everyone, human, Nari, Vreth, into ghosts of themselves. In that green light, Deo operated on a Nari elder whose intestinal tract had been perforated by shrapnel. He worked for 2 hours and 40 minutes with chemical lights taped to the ceiling above his table and Adiz holding a hand torch at the precise angle he needed, adjusting without being asked every time his hands shifted. When it was done, when the elder was closed and stable and breathing on its own, Deo peeled off his gloves and sat on the floor with his back against the wall and his eyes closed, and he said, very quietly, "I could use that coffee now." Tamaz was there in 30 seconds. He always was. And Tamaz made coffee. He made it constantly, obsessively, from his seemingly infinite supply of terrible synthetic grounds, and he carried it to everyone in paper cups that he folded himself from medical packaging. The coffee was exactly as bad as it always was. People drank it anyway. It was warm, and the outpost was getting cold as the power systems failed one by one, and warmth was not a small thing. At hour 20, a Vreth artillery barrage struck the hillside 200 meters south of the outpost. The concussion wave shattered what was left of the windows and knocked 3 patients off their cots. No one was seriously hurt, but the message was clear. The Vreth knew exactly where they were, and they were closing the circle. Marin gathered her team in the corridor outside the ward, 11 faces in the green chemical light, tired, scared, still here. "I'm not going to give a speech," she said. "You know the situation. The Vreth are within striking distance. We have no weapons, no comms, no extraction. We have patience. That's what we have." She looked at each of them, Tamaz with his flask, Leon with her sample trays, Deo with his bone saw, Yuki with her paper cups. Adiz with her steady hands, Chen, Park, Rivera, Osai, Tanaka, Hoffman, 12 humans in a hole in the ground on a world their own fleet had abandoned. If anyone wants to walk out of here and try to make it back to coalition lines, I won't stop you. I won't judge you. You've already done more than anyone had the right to ask. Nobody moved. Right, Marin said, back to work. They went back to work. Marin moved through the ward, patient by patient. She changed dressings on the Vreth soldiers in the corner. The conscious one tracked her movements with its compound eyes, and she spoke to it, calmly, professionally, explaining what she was doing even though she had no idea if the translation matrix was rendering her words into anything the Vreth could parse. She checked on Kale every half hour. The child's breathing was worse. The crystalline rasp had deepened, and the golden tears flowed faster now, leaving luminescent trails on the cot's surface like the tracks of small, bright animals. During one of these checks, at roughly the 14th hour, Kale asked, "Why do you make that sound?" "What sound?" "The low sound, with your mouth closed when you work." Marin realized she had been humming. The lullaby, her grandmother's song about the child and the river and the moon. She had not been conscious of it. "It's a song," she said, "from my home. My grandmother sang it to me when I was small." "What does it say?" "It says that the river carries the child's worries to the moon, and the moon holds them until morning, and in the morning the child is light enough to float." Kale considered this. That is not how rivers or moons work. Marin laughed. It was a real laugh startled out of her, and it echoed in the ward like something that didn't belong there but was welcome anyway. "No," she said, "it's not. That's the point." "I don't understand." "Songs don't have to be true. They just have to be kind." Kale's glowing eyes blinked slowly. "Sing it again. The low sound, I like it." So Marin hummed. She sat beside a dying alien child in an abandoned hospital on a contested world, while an enemy army surrounded them, and she hummed a Yoruba lullaby about rivers and moons. And for a few minutes, the crystalline rasp of Kale's breathing fell into rhythm with the melody, and the golden tears slowed, and the child's grip on her hand loosened into something that was not fear but something close to rest. At hour 26, Leon emerged from her lab with shadows under her eyes and a vial of cloudy liquid in her hand. "It's not perfect," she said. "It's a rough synthesis. The enzyme concentration is lower than I'd like, and the delivery mechanism is jury-rigged. I'm using a repurposed anesthetic nebulizer. But the in vitro results are clear. It dissolves the crystalline matrix. In early-stage cases, it should clear the lungs entirely. In advanced cases," she looked toward the ward, toward Kale, "it should slow the progression, maybe stop it. I won't promise more than that." "How much can you produce?" "With what we have, enough for maybe 30 treatments. If I strip the remaining chemosynthesis supplies and repurpose the wound care analgesics for their carrier compounds, I can stretch it to 50. We have 163 drift patients." "I know the numbers, Marin." Leon's voice was sharp, then soft. "Start with the children. Start with the worst. Give me more time and I'll figure out how to scale it." They started with Kale. Marin held the nebulizer mask over the child's face, while Leon monitored the readouts. The cloudy mist seeped into Kale's airways. For a long, terrible minute, nothing happened. Then Kale coughed, a deep, racking cough that produced a spray of glittering fragments, tiny crystal shards expelled from the bronchial tree like shattered glass. The child gasped, coughed again, and then drew a breath that was, for the first time in days, clear. Not perfect, not healthy, but clear. Kale's eyes opened wide. The golden tears were still flowing, but slower now, and the luminescence was fading. "The low sound," Kale whispered. "I can hear it better now." Marin was not humming. She realized that her eyes were wet, and she wiped them with the back of her hand, and she thought about the difference between tears that carry crystal and tears that carry nothing but salt and gratitude, and the unbearable weight of small victories in large disasters. They treated 14 children that night. 11 responded. 3 were too far gone. The crystal matrix had reached the pleural space, and no enzyme could dissolve what had already hardened into architecture. Those 3, Maren sat with. She held their hands and hummed the song and stayed until the crystalline breathing stopped and the dark eyes went still and the silver-blue skin shifted to pewter. The second child to die was the one Maren had found in the burn zone, the one who had touched her glove, the one who had said the sky burned and Mother stopped. Adiz had carried it most of the way to Outpost Mercy, and she had been the one to bathe it, to find a clean cot for it, to sit beside it during the hours when the drift was advancing fastest. When the child stopped breathing, Adiz's hands were still on its chest, still reading the electromagnetic pulse, still waiting for the flutter that would not come. Maren found her afterward in the supply room, sitting on an overturned crate, staring at her own hands as though they belonged to someone else. "I felt it stop," Adiz said. "The secondary pulse. It's the last thing to go in the Nari. It felt like a string being cut. You can feel it in your fingertips, this tiny vibration, and then it just stops. And your fingers are still there, still pressed against the skin, but the skin is just skin now. It's not a person anymore. It's just..." She stopped talking. Maren sat beside her. She did not say it gets easier, because it doesn't. She did not say you did everything you could, because Adiz knew that and it didn't help. She sat beside a 20-year-old from Lagos who had just felt a child die under her hands on a planet that humanity had no particular reason to care about, and she put her arm around the girl's shoulders, and she held on. After a while, Adiz straightened her spine, that same stubborn tilt. "The next one," she said. "I want to treat the next one." She treated 5 more children before dawn. All 5 lived. Deo found Maren after the 3rd death. He didn't say anything. He just sat beside her and handed her a cup of Tamaz's terrible coffee, and they sat together in the quiet of the ward and drank it, and it was exactly as bad as ever, and it was enough. At hour 31, the Vreth came. They did not announce themselves. There was no broadcast, no ultimatum, no demand for surrender. One moment the perimeter was static. The next, Vreth infantry were moving through the outpost's breached eastern wing, their armor clicking against the rubble with a sound like large insects navigating a dry riverbed. Maren heard them before she saw them. She was in the main ward, changing the dressing on a Nari woman's abdominal wound, and the clicking sound reached her through the walls like rain on a roof made of bone. "Tamaz, I see them." His voice was steady on the comm. 12 infantry, full combat configuration. They're coming through the east corridor. Weapons. Everything they've got. Maren looked around the ward. 212 patients. 11 medics. No weapons. She looked at Deo, who was holding his bone saw with the expression of a man who knew it was useless but couldn't bring himself to put it down. She looked at Leon, who was cradling a tray of enzyme vials against her chest like a mother holding an infant. She looked at Yuki, who was standing between the Vreth soldiers and a row of Nari children with no plan and no weapon, and no intention of moving. "Everyone stay where you are," Maren said. "Keep working. Whatever happens, keep working." She walked to the east corridor. The Vreth were already there, 12 soldiers in full armor, their weapons raised, their compound eyes scanning the space with that panoramic, all-seeing attention that made it impossible to tell where they were looking. At their center, one figure stood taller than the rest, its armor marked with the command insignia of a Vreth field officer. A sub-commander, at least, maybe higher. The first soldier through the breach had its weapon trained on the main ward entrance. Through the gap in the wall, it could see Yuki crouched beside a Nari child, replacing a catheter with steady hands. The weapon tracked to her. Yuki did not look up. She finished the catheter insertion, checked the flow rate, adjusted the drip, and only then raised her eyes to the armored figure, pointing enough firepower at her to reduce the wall behind her to memory. She looked at the weapon. She looked at the soldier. Then she looked back at her patient and moved to the next bed. The weapon followed her. Then the aim wavered, not fear, not hesitation, but something the Vreth soldier's training had not prepared it for. The target was supposed to react. The target was supposed to be afraid or aggressive, or at minimum aware that it was about to die. The target was checking a blood pressure cuff. Marin stopped 10 paces from the commander. She held up her hands, palms out, showing the open hand sigil. The universal sign, I am here to help. I am not armed. Do not shoot me. The Vreth commander studied her. Its compound eyes fractured her image into 100 overlapping versions of herself. She knew this from the xenobiology texts, knew that the Vreth perceived the world as a layered mosaic of perspectives, each eye facet capturing a slightly different angle, the brain assembling them into a single, multidimensional picture that was, in theory, more complete than anything a human could perceive. She wondered what she looked like to it. 100 small women in bloody surgical scrubs, holding up 100 small pairs of empty hands. The commander spoke. The translation matrix caught it, processed it, delivered it in a voice that was too flat to carry the weight of the words. You are the enemy. Why are you still here? It was not a question. Vreth interrogatives were structured differently. They used tonal shifts that the matrix couldn't replicate. This was a statement wearing a question's shape, and the statement underneath it was, you should not be here. You should be dead or gone. Your presence is an error. We're medics, Marin said. We treat the wounded. Your fleet has withdrawn. Your forces have surrendered this territory. You have no strategic value, no tactical position, no means of resistance. You are 13 soft-bodied organisms in a structure we could reduce to rubble in 4 seconds. The commander's head tilted, a gesture that, in Vreth body language, indicated the equivalent of narrowing one's eyes. Why are you still here? Because there are people dying in that room. They are not your people, they are Nari. They're patients. The commander was silent for a moment. Its mandibles moved in a pattern Marin had never seen before, not the rapid clicking of aggression, not the slow grinding of contemplation, but something between the two, a movement that might have been confusion in a species that had never needed a word for it. We detected your biological signatures, the commander said. 13 human organisms, no weapons signatures, no defensive systems. Our analysts classified this structure as a non-combatant medical facility. I was dispatched to verify this classification. And I find 13 humans who walked through an orbital bombardment zone, crossed 7 kilometers of their own fleet's scorched earth, and entered a contested territory surrounded by enemy forces, unarmed. The head tilt again. Our strategic models do not account for this behavior. Marin lowered her hand slowly. Can I show you something? She didn't wait for permission. She turned and walked back into the ward, and the Vreth commander followed, and the 12 soldiers followed the commander, their weapons still raised, their armor clicking on the stone floor. The ward opened before them. Marin watched the Vreth commander take it in. The rows of Nari patients, bandaged, monitored, treated. The human medics moving among them, still working, as Marin had told them to. Leon administering the nebulized enzyme to a Nari teenager. Deo stitching a wound closed with steady hands. Yuki adjusting an IV drip. Tamaz offering a cup of terrible coffee to a conscious Nari woman who sniffed it and recoiled, and then took it anyway because it was warm. And in the corner the 3 Vreth soldiers, bandaged, monitored, alive. The commander stopped. Its compound eyes locked on the 3 Vreth wounded with an intensity that Marin could feel, a sudden sharpening of attention that made the air in the room change texture. Its mandibles stopped moving entirely, which, in Vreth body language, was the equivalent of a human going pale. Those are Vreth soldiers, the commander said. Yes. They are wounded. They were caught in the same bombardment that hit us. They crawled to our door. My sergeant treated them. Your sergeant treated enemy combatants. Deo looked up from his sutures. They were bleeding, he said, as if this explained everything. As if this was the only variable that mattered. To Deo it was. The commander walked to the corner. It stood over the 3 wounded Vreth, and the conscious one looked up at it with compound eyes that reflected 100 tiny versions of its commanding officer's face, and it said something in Vreth that the translation matrix didn't catch. Too quiet, too quick, more tonal shift than speech. The commander turned back to Marin. Our intelligence indicated that humans are a warrior species, it said, adaptive, aggressive, dangerous beyond your physical specifications. Our strategic doctrine classifies you as a high-priority threat. It paused. The mandibles began to move again, that strange, in-between pattern. Our intelligence did not mention this. Mention what? That you would treat the enemy. That you would walk into fire not to fight but to heal. That you would stay in a place your own commanders abandoned and spend your resources on species that are not your own, including the species trying to kill you. Another pause. Our models have no variable for this. Our analysts would classify it as irrational. It's not irrational, Marin said. It's medicine. Medicine is a practice. This is something else. You are not practicing medicine. You are practicing, the commander stopped. Its mandibles worked, searching for a concept that its language apparently struggled to contain. You are practicing a belief. You believe that suffering requires a response regardless of the sufferer's identity. This is not rational. This is not strategic. This is human, Tamaz said from across the room. He was holding his flask. The word you're looking for is human. The commander looked at him. 100 fractured images of a man holding a flask of terrible coffee. Yes, it said, and the word carried more weight than the translation matrix could render. Human. What happened next was not dramatic. There was no grand gesture, no sweeping declaration, no treaty signed in the rubble of a bombed-out hospital. What happened was small. What happened was this. The Vreth commander ordered its soldiers to lower their weapons. Then it ordered them to stand down. Then it walked to the entrance of the outpost and transmitted a message on its command frequency. A message Marin could not understand, because Vreth command-level communications used an encrypted tonal language that no translation matrix had ever cracked. But the result was visible. Over the next 2 hours, the Vreth perimeter pulled back. The crawler tanks reversed. The infantry withdrew to a distance of 5 kilometers and held position, not gone, but not advancing. A buffer zone. Before the commander left the outpost, it did something Marin did not expect. It walked to the corner where the 3 Vreth wounded lay, and it crouched beside the conscious soldier, the one that had been watching everything with its compound eyes since Deo first bandaged it, and they spoke in low, rapid Vreth that the translation matrix could barely catch. Fragments came through, treated us, their own supplies, the one with the blade instrument, No, they carry no weapons. I watched them, Commander. I watched them for 2 days. The commander stood. It turned to Deo, who was leaning against the wall nearby, bone saw tucked into his belt like a sidearm he'd forgotten he was wearing. The commander's mandibles moved in that slow, grinding pattern of contemplation. Your soldier tells me you sang to him, the commander said to Deo. When the pain was worst, you made sounds. Deo blinked. I talk to my patients while I work, keeps them calm, keeps me calm too, honestly. He says you told him about a place, a city, where you were born. Lagos, Deo said. I told him about Lagos, the markets, the traffic, my mother's jollof rice. He shrugged, a little embarrassed. He couldn't understand a word of it, but I figured the tone mattered more than the content. The commander stared at him for a long moment. Then it turned and walked out. And then at hour 34, something else. A Vreth transport appeared at the outpost's entrance, unmanned. Its cargo bay was open, and inside, Marin counted them twice because she didn't believe it the first time, were medical supplies. Vreth medical supplies, designed for Vreth biology but supplies nonetheless. Bandages, analgesics, fluid replacement compounds, and stacked in careful rows along the back wall, atmospheric scrubbers, machines designed to filter contaminants from enclosed air spaces. Marin stood in the doorway and stared at them. Tamaz appeared beside her. He looked at the supplies, he looked at her. He took a sip of his coffee. "I think," he said, "the tide just changed its mind." Marin's hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat against her thighs until they stopped. Behind her, she heard Leon come to the doorway and make a sound that was half laugh, half sob, the sound of a scientist who has been working on faith for 30 hours and has just been handed proof that faith, occasionally, is not stupid. "Those scrubbers," Leon said, peering into the cargo bay with the expression of a child who has found exactly the right toy. "Marin, those are molecular sieve scrubbers. The filtration membranes. Do you understand what I can do with those?" "Save lives." A lot of them, Marin." Deo appeared behind Leon. He looked at the Vreth supplies, then at Marin, then at the sky where the crawler tanks had been. He put his bone saw down on a crate, the first time Marin had seen him release it in 2 days, and he rubbed his face with both hands. "My grandmother," he said, "used to say that God works in mysterious ways. I think she undersold it." The next 14 hours were the most productive of Marin's medical career. Leon reverse-engineered the Vreth atmospheric scrubbers and used their filtration membranes to scale up her enzyme synthesis. The scrubbers' molecular sieves were almost perfectly suited to isolating the carbonic anhydrase variant, a coincidence so elegant that Leon called it either convergent engineering or proof that the universe has a sick sense of humor. They treated every drift patient in the outpost, every one. The children first, then the critical adults, then the moderate cases, then the early-stage exposures. The ward filled with the sound of coughing, the good kind, the productive kind, the kind that expels crystal shards and makes room for air. Nari patients who had been drowning in their own lungs sat up, breathed, looked around with dark eyes that were wet but no longer glowing. Kale was among the first to recover enough to sit up. The child sat on the edge of its cot and watched the medics work with an expression of grave, alien fascination, and when Marin passed by on her rounds, Kale reached out and caught her sleeve. "You came back," Kale said. "I said I would. You said many things. You said songs don't have to be true. You said they just have to be kind." Kale paused. Was the promise kind or was it true? Marin crouched to meet the child's eyes. Those enormous dark eyes, no longer leaking gold. "It was both," she said. "That's the trick with humans. The kind things are the ones we work hardest to make true." Kale considered this with the seriousness of a child who has recently learned that the universe is neither kind nor unkind but merely large. And that kindness, when it occurs, is manufactured by small beings who have decided to spend their limited energy on something that offers no strategic advantage and no guarantee of return. "I would like to hear the song again," Kale said, "the one about the river and the moon." Marin sang it. Not hummed, sang, in full voice in Yoruba, in the middle of a ward full of recovering patients and exhausted medics, and 3 bewildered Vreth soldiers who had never heard a human voice raised in something other than command or pain. The words filled the space the way the Sealith filled the valleys of Sahel 4, softly, naturally, reaching toward whatever light was available. When she finished, the ward was quiet. Not silent, there was still the beep of monitors, the hiss of nebulizers, the soft click of Leon's equipment, but quiet in the way that a room gets when something has happened that no one expected and no one can quite name. Tamaz raised his flask in a small salute. "Encore," he said. Marin did not do an encore. She went back to work. At hour 46, the Vreth commander returned. It came alone this time. No escort, no weapons. It walked into the ward and stood in the center of the room and looked at everything with its compound eyes. The recovered patients, the working medics, the 3 Vreth soldiers who were now well enough to sit up and who looked at their commander with expressions that the human staff could not read, but that carried, even across species, the unmistakable weight of soldiers who have seen something that has rearranged the furniture in their heads. The commander spoke to Marin. Our strategic command has been in contact with Compact High Command. A ceasefire has been proposed for this sector. Medical corridors, protected zones for civilian treatment, both sides. Marin's hands were shaking. She put them behind her back. A ceasefire. For this sector, not the war. We are not that optimistic. The mandibles moved in what Marin was beginning to recognize as the Vreth equivalent of a wry expression. But for this place, for this work, our command was persuaded by my report. They have no model for what you did here, but they recognize its implications. If your species will walk into fire to heal your enemies, then the cost of continuing to fight in this sector exceeds our projections. Because you'd have to kill medics. Because our soldiers would know they were killing medics. There is a difference. The commander paused. We are not without our own understanding of cost, Doctor. We simply calculate it differently. You have introduced a variable we had not considered. The variable of, again, the searching mandibles. Again, the concept that strained the boundaries of Vreth language. Compassion, Marin said. No, we have a word for compassion. This is not that. Compassion is feeling. What you did was action without regard for reciprocity. You treated our wounded knowing we might kill you for it. You stayed in this place knowing no one would come for you. You walked through fire your own fleet set. The commander's compound eyes fixed on her, all of them, every facet, 100 tiny versions of Marin reflected in alien chitin. Our word for this is, it made a sound that the translation matrix could not parse, a deep tonal vibration that seemed to resonate in Marin's sternum. It does not translate. But it is the word we use for a force that moves without being pushed. A river that flows uphill, a thing that should not exist but does, and in existing, changes the shape of the landscape around it. Marin looked at this alien, this enemy commander, this representative of a species that had deployed bioweapons against civilians and burned worlds and advanced like tides across contested space, and she saw something she recognized. Not friendship, not surrender, something harder and more durable than either. Respect earned in the only currency that matters, which is action taken at cost. Tell your command, she said, that we'll need more supplies, and tell them she thought about the burn zone, the glass desert, the Sealith frozen in its last reach toward the light that killed it. Tell them we'll treat anyone who comes through that door, any species, any uniform. That's not a negotiation, that's just who we are. The commander inclined its head, a gesture Marin had never seen a Vreth make before, something borrowed, perhaps, from the 100 reflected images of humans it had been watching for 2 days. Yes, it said, we are beginning to understand that. It turned and walked out. At the entrance it paused. Without turning back it said, the song, the one about the river, our auditory processing captured it. I do not understand the words, but the tonal pattern. It stopped. It will be in my report, under the section on human psychological resilience. It left. Marin stood in the ward. Around her, her team worked. Leon was calibrating a new batch of enzyme synthesis. Deo was arguing with a Nari patient about the importance of staying in bed. Yuki was teaching a group of Nari children how to fold paper cups from medical packaging, a skill she had learned from Tamaz, who had learned it from a grandmother in Okinawa who had survived a war of her own, and had taught her grandson that when the world is broken, you make what you can from what you have. Tamaz appeared at Marin's shoulder. He offered her the flask. She took it. The coffee was, impossibly, even worse than usual. He had been stretching the grounds, she realized, making each cup thinner and more bitter, rationing the one luxury they had left. It was warm. She drank it. Across the ward, Kale was sitting up in bed, watching a paper cup unfold in Yuki's hands with an expression of pure alien wonder. The dark eyes were clear. The golden tears were gone. The breathing was steady and strong, no crystal, no rasp, just the simple rhythm of lungs doing what lungs were designed to do, which is to take in the world and give it back, changed. Marin leaned against the doorframe. She was exhausted. She was filthy. She had not slept in 2 days. Her hands smelled like antiseptic and alien blood and terrible synthetic coffee. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. In the quiet hour before dawn, while the ward slept and the chemical lights burned low, Marin sat in the supply room and pulled the photograph from her med kit. Amara's face, gap-toothed and grinning. "Come home soon, Mama." She held it for a long time. Then she opened her datapad, the one she used for patient notes, and began to record. "Hey baby girl, it's Mama. I'm on a planet you've never heard of in a hospital that isn't really a hospital anymore, and I just wanted to tell you a few things in case the mail is slow getting home." She paused, wiped her eyes. "I met a kid today. Not a human kid, a different kind. But the same kind too, you know. Scared and brave and asking questions I don't have good answers to. She asked me why I stayed when everyone else left, and I gave her the doctor answer, the official one about patience and duty. But the real answer is you. The real answer is that I looked at this kid and I saw every kid who ever needed someone to stay, and I thought about you. And I thought about the kind of world I want you to live in, and it turns out the kind of world I want you to live in is one where people don't leave." She touched the photograph. "I love you, Amara. I'll be home when I can. Save me some jollof rice. Your Uncle Deo says his mother's is better than mine, and I need you to back me up on this." She closed the recording. She sealed the photograph back into its waterproof sleeve. She tucked it into her med kit against her hip where it belonged. Then she went back to the ward, because there was work to do, and she was the kind of person who did it. Outside, the Vreth perimeter held its distance. The crawler tanks idled. The infantry stood down, and in the sky above Sahel 4, where the coalition fleet had fled and the drive signatures had faded, and the void had closed behind them like water behind a stone, the stars came out. The same stars that had watched 100 wars on 100 worlds, indifferent to all of them. But below those stars, in a bombed-out hospital on a hill, 12 humans who had walked into the Crossfire were still working, still treating, still making paper cups and terrible coffee and singing songs about rivers and moons to children who were not their species, but were, in every way that mattered, their patients. The tide had not stopped, but it had learned, for the first time in its long and patient advance, to flow around something it could not move. And in the morning, Marin hummed.